By the time I saw that moving truck parked outside my house that evening, I finally understood why my daughter-in-law, Beverly, had slipped that note into my toolbox that morning. "Jerry, please don't go home today. If you come back early, they'll finish before you get there." I'm Gerald Thompson, 63 years old, been a master electrician for 35 years before I retired 2 years back. Lost my wife, Margaret, to cancer 3 years ago. These days, I live alone in the 2-story colonial we built together back in 1989 on Maple Street, a decent place with white siding, black shutters, and a detached workshop out back where I still tinker with electrical projects. The property sits on just over an acre, worth about $520,000 now, which seems crazy for what we paid, but that's today's market. My workshop is where I spend most of my time. It's a 20 Panks 30 building Margaret used to call my man cave, though she said it with affection. The concrete floor stays cool in summer, and I've got proper 220-volt service running to every corner. Tall pegboards line the west wall. My workbench sits under the big window facing the house, and the old Mosler safe, the one that weighs 800 pounds and took 4 guys to install, sits in the back corner behind my drill press. That safe holds everything important: insurance papers, the house deed, my investment account statements, even Margaret's jewelry. That morning started like any other Tuesday. I was heading out to help my neighbor Pete install a ceiling fan in his kitchen when I found Beverly's note tucked under my wire strippers on the workbench. My hands went cold reading it. Beverly isn't the dramatic type. She's worked as a teller at First National for 8 years. Practical as they come, the kind of person who balances her checkbook to the penny. If she was warning me about something, it was serious. The whole mess started 3 days earlier, at my birthday dinner. My son Victor had insisted on making it a big deal this year. "Dad, you're 63, we should celebrate properly." He turned our dining room into some kind of business meeting, inviting people I barely knew, a couple from his restaurant, 2 guys he called business associates. The dining room felt crowded with 8 people around Margaret's old oak table. One of the associates introduced himself as Curtis Vale, a logistics consultant, whatever that means these days. He had the kind of handshake that goes on too long and kept asking questions about my retirement planning. The other guy, Danny something, claimed to work in estate optimization. I remember thinking these weren't the kind of friends Victor usually brought around. Victor runs 3 small restaurants in the Tacoma area, or used to anyway. Started with one place, Mario's Italian Kitchen on Pacific Avenue, that did well enough. Then he got ambitious, opened 2 more locations with borrowed money just as the economy started getting shaky. I'd seen the stress eating at him for months. Dark circles under his eyes, losing weight, constantly checking his phone during family dinners. Every time I asked how business was going, he'd brush it off with phrases like growing pains and cash flow adjustments. But I'd been around long enough to recognize a man in financial trouble. The signs were there: canceled Sunday dinners, Beverly looking exhausted, my grandson Tommy asking why Daddy was always angry. During that birthday dinner, the conversation kept steering toward my finances like a compass finding north. "Dad, you ever think about simplifying things? You know, getting your estate organized?" Victor asked while passing the mashed potatoes Margaret's recipe. I told him we'd always kept our paperwork in order. "What about a living trust? That might make things easier for everyone down the road," Curtis suggested, cutting his roast beef with surgical precision. I said I'd been thinking about it. That was true. My attorney Howard Bennett had been after me for months to set one up. Said it would save headaches later. Beverly sat across from me in Margaret's old chair, barely touching her food. She kept glancing at Victor, then down at her plate, like she was watching a tennis match nobody else could see. I remember thinking she looked exhausted, but with 2 kids and her job at the bank, who wouldn't be? Little did I know she was carrying a much heavier load. The conversation felt rehearsed, like everyone except me had gotten a script beforehand. Danny mentioned how many elderly people were house rich but cash poor, and how modern financial planning could unlock equity for better living situations. Curtis nodded along, adding stories about clients who downsized and found tremendous relief in simplified living. Near the end of the evening, after Margaret's apple pie, the recipe Beverly had learned by heart, Victor asked something that stuck with me like a splinter. "You still keep all the important stuff in that old safe in the workshop?" I nodded, wondering why he was asking. He'd known about that safe since high school, had even helped me move it into position back in '95. After everyone left, I walked out to the workshop to check on something I couldn't quite name. The overhead fluorescent light switch felt different under my finger, loose, like someone had been fiddling with the mounting screws. That's when I noticed the electrical panel door was slightly ajar. In 35 years of working with electricity, you develop instincts about these things. Every panel door, every junction box, every switch plate becomes as familiar as your own reflection. Someone had been in there who didn't belong. I opened the panel door wider and saw scratches around the main breaker, fresh metal shavings on the concrete floor below. Someone had been trying to understand my electrical system, maybe looking for a way to disable the security system I'd installed after Margaret got sick. The workshop suddenly felt violated, like someone had been reading my diary. I called Howard Bennett first thing the next morning. Howard's been handling my legal work since Margaret got sick, a straight-talking lawyer who doesn't pad his bills or waste time on small talk. His office sits above the hardware store on Commerce Street, the same building where his father practiced law for 40 years before him. Howard, I need that living trust paperwork you've been pushing. Can you get it ready today? That's sudden, Jerry? Everything okay? I told him about the dinner conversation, the questions about my finances, and the workshop. Howard went quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that means a lawyer is thinking hard. Bring me your property deed and investment statements. Let's get this done right. And Jerry, don't mention this to anyone until it's filed. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, I sat in Howard's cramped office with its law books, stacked floor to ceiling, and the smell of old paper and coffee. His desk was covered with documents, my house deed, copies of my retirement accounts, the insurance policies Margaret and I had set up years ago. Howard explained each page in plain English. None of that legal mumbo-jumbo that makes honest people feel stupid. This living trust protects everything, he said, pointing to the signature lines. Your house, workshop, investments, even Margaret's jewelry. Nobody can touch any of it without going through me first, and I don't sign anything unless you're sitting right here telling me to. I signed everything with the same Mont Blanc pen Margaret had given me for our 25th anniversary. The house, the workshop, my retirement accounts, all protected in a revocable living trust. Howard filed the paperwork electronically that same day. Just in case, he said, though we both knew it was more than precaution. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt different, like someone had moved all the furniture an inch to the left while I wasn't looking. Around 2 a.m., I heard a car in the driveway, Victor's Ford pickup with the diesel engine that needed work. I watched from the bedroom window as he sat there for maybe 20 minutes, engine off, just staring at the house Margaret and I had built with our own hands. The porch light caught his face through the windshield. He looked older than his 38 years, worn down by something heavier than normal business stress. Part of me wanted to go out there, ask what was wrong, maybe find a way to help. But something about the way he was studying the house, like he was memorizing it or planning something, kept me behind that curtain. When he finally left, I found myself checking all the door locks twice, something I hadn't done since, right after Margaret died and the house felt too empty. The next morning brought Beverly's note tucked under my wire strippers. The handwriting was shaky, like she'd written it in a hurry or while upset. Reading it again, I noticed she'd used my workbench pen, the one I kept clipped to my work calendar. That meant she'd been in the workshop, probably early morning before work, probably after Victor left for the restaurant. My gut told me to listen to her, but I needed to understand what was happening in my own house. Instead of going to Pete's place to install that ceiling fan, I drove to the hardware store where I'd bought supplies for 30 years. Eddie Kowalski, the owner, knew every contractor in town. Eddie, I need a small security camera. Something I can hide, runs on battery power. Eddie raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. That's the beauty of dealing with people who understand tools. They know when a man has a legitimate need. He set me up with a wireless camera about the size of a smoke detector and a phone app that would let me watch live footage. With my electrical background, hiding it inside the workshop's main junction box was simple work. I killed the power to the whole building, unscrewed the panel cover, and mounted the camera behind the circuit breakers where it could see the entire workshop through a gap between the breaker switches. From the outside, the panel looked exactly the same. To anyone else, it was just another gray metal box full of wires and switches. I spent the day at my brother Ray's place across town helping him rewire his basement while watching the camera feed on my phone. Ray's always been good company, retired from the phone company, knows how to work with his hands, doesn't ask too many questions when a man needs to think. Around 11 a.m., Victor's truck pulled into my driveway. He had a key. I'd given him 1 year ago for emergencies, back when I trusted him with everything I owned. The camera showed him going straight to the workshop, moving like he knew exactly what he was looking for. He spent 20 minutes trying different combinations on the safe. I watched him on my phone screen, this man I'd taught to throw a baseball and change a car's oil, now trying to break into my most private possessions. His movements were methodical, patient, like he'd been thinking about this for a while. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. The camera didn't pick up audio, but I could see him gesturing toward the safe, then toward the house. He was reporting to someone, giving an update on his progress. After he left, I called Howard immediately. They're making their move tomorrow. Who's they? I don't know yet, but Victor's involved. He was just here trying to crack my safe. Did you get it on camera? Every second. Howard's voice got serious. Don't go home tonight. Stay at your brother's place. Tomorrow, when they make their move, we'll be ready. But I couldn't stay away. This was my home, the place Margaret and I had built our life together. If someone was planning to take it from me, I needed to see it happen. I needed to look them in the eye and let them know I wasn't the confused old man they thought I was. That evening, I sat in my kitchen thinking about the boy I'd raised. Victor had been a good kid, played second base on the high school team, helped me wire our first edition when he was 16, worked summers at Eddie's hardware store learning the value of honest work. I remembered teaching him how to strip electrical wire without nicking the copper, how to read a circuit diagram, how to shake hands and look a man in the eye. When had things gone so wrong? When had my son decided that stealing from his father was an acceptable solution to his problems? Beverly showed up around 8 p.m., parking her Honda Civic behind my pickup in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched her sit in the car for a full 5 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel like she was trying to decide something important. When she finally knocked on the back door, the one that leads into Margaret's old mudroom with its coat hooks and boot tray, her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. "Jerry, I need to tell you something. Can we sit down?" We sat at the kitchen table where Margaret and I had shared 30 years of morning coffee and evening conversations. The table still bore the ring stains from countless coffee mugs and the shallow groove where my grandson Tommy had pressed too hard with his homework pencil. Beverly's hands trembled slightly as she placed them flat on the familiar oak surface. "Victor's in deeper trouble than you know, Jerry. Much deeper." She laid it out in the careful way people use when they're delivering news that's going to change everything. Victor owed $380,000. The restaurant expansion had failed completely. 2 of his 3 locations were hemorrhaging money. The third was barely breaking even. But instead of cutting his losses, consolidating, maybe filing for bankruptcy protection like a sensible businessman, he'd started gambling. "It started small," Beverly said, her voice barely above a whisper, "just weekend trips to the casino in Olympia." He said it was stress relief, a way to unwind from the restaurant pressure. Then it became Tuesday poker games with some guys from the restaurant association. Before I knew it, he was driving to Las Vegas twice a month, convinced he could win his way out of the business debt. The numbers made my stomach clench. Restaurant debt, $180,000. Casino markers, $120,000. Personal loans from what Beverly called private lenders, the kind of people who don't file paperwork with the state when you miss a payment, $80,000. He owes money to people who break kneecaps, Jerry. Real people with real baseball bats who've been calling our house at all hours. Last week, one of them showed up at Tommy's soccer practice, just stood there watching from the parking lot until I called the police. Beverly reached into her purse and pulled out photocopies of documents I recognized from law shows on TV. Power of attorney papers with my name typed at the top. Signature lines waiting to be filled. Notary stamps that looked official but somehow wrong. I found these in his car yesterday morning. He'd hidden them under the spare tire in his trunk. Her voice cracked slightly. There are more papers too. A lease agreement for some assisted living place in Puyallup I've never heard of. Property transfer documents. Even a medical evaluation form claiming you're showing signs of dementia. I stared at those papers spread across Margaret's table. The forgery was good. Whoever had prepared them knew what official documents should look like. My name was spelled correctly, my address was right, even my social security number was there in the proper places. "He's hired movers for tomorrow morning," Beverly continued. "Allied Van Lines. He told them you'd already agreed to sell the house and move into assisted living, that you just needed help packing your belongings. He's planning to have everything loaded and gone before you get home from your errands." The audacity of it hit me like a slap. Victor had choreographed the entire theft, right down to the moving company's schedule. He'd probably told them I was confused, maybe a little forgetful, that family was helping me make this transition for my own good. "How long have you known about this plan?" "I found the papers yesterday, but I've been suspicious for weeks." "He's been asking too many questions about your finances, your daily routine when you usually leave the house. Last month he asked me if I thought you were getting forgetful. When I said no, he seemed disappointed." Beverly pulled out her iPhone and placed it on the table between us. "There's something else. I've been recording our conversations about the debt situation. I started doing it because his stories kept changing, and I wanted to keep track of what was true. But some of these recordings, they show what he's really planning." She played one file dated 3 days ago. Victor's voice came through the speaker, clearly, tired and frustrated. "The old man's got to be sitting on at least $500,000 in equity. Once I get power of attorney, I can liquidate everything. Pay off the restaurants, pay off the casino debt, and these private lenders get their money. Everyone wins." Another recording from 2 weeks earlier. "Dad's always been too trusting. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him if I explain it right. Tell him it's for tax purposes or estate planning or something." And the one that made my blood run cold, from just last week. If he won't cooperate, we'll just have him declared incompetent. I know a doctor who'll sign the evaluation for the right price. Once he's in that care facility, I can manage his assets however I need to. I listened to my son planning my future like I was already dead, dividing up the life Margaret, and I had built together like it was just numbers on a spreadsheet. The boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle who'd helped me install the kitchen cabinets, Margaret had picked out, who'd cried in my arms when she died, that boy was planning to steal everything I had left. Beverly, why are you telling me this? He's your husband, the father of your children. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands on the table. When she looked up, her jaw was set in a way that reminded me of Margaret when she'd made a difficult decision. Because it's wrong, Jerry. Because you've been good to me since the day Victor brought me home to meet you and Margaret. Because my children deserve better than a father who steals from family. She paused, gathering strength. And because if I don't stop this, I'm as guilty as he is. That night, I called my neighbor Pete Martinez, a retired police sergeant who lives 2 houses down. Pete's the kind of neighbor every working man hopes for, keeps his yard neat. Waves when he sees you, minds his own business but shows up when you need help. Pete, I might need a witness tomorrow morning. Can you clear your schedule? What kind of witness? The kind that stops a son from stealing his father's house? Pete was quiet for a moment. In his years as a cop, he'd probably seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable. What time do you need me? Early. And Pete, bring your camera. The next morning, I left the house at my usual time, 7:30 a.m., mine is but parked 3 blocks away behind the old Texaco station that's been closed for years. The security camera feed on my phone showed a moving truck arriving at 9:30 a.m. sharp. Allied van lines, just like Beverly had said. 2 men in uniform shirts started unloading boxes and dollies, moving with the kind of efficiency people have when they believe they're doing legitimate work. Victor stood in my driveway giving directions, wearing his good khakis and the blue button-down shirt Margaret had bought him last Christmas. From a distance, he looked like any caring son helping his elderly father make a difficult transition. The performance was convincing enough that Mrs. Patterson from next door came over to offer her sympathies about my health situation. Start with the tools in the workshop, Victor told the movers, pointing toward my building, then we'll get the gun safe from the basement. Use the furniture dolly, it's bolted to the concrete floor, but the bolts are loose. I called Howard and Pete. It's showtime. At 11:45, I drove back to my own house feeling strange, like I was visiting someone else's life. The moving truck sat in my driveway like it belonged there, its rear door open wide, revealing boxes labeled Gerald Thompson bedroom and Gerald Thompson kitchen. Victor had been thorough in his theft, even printing proper moving labels. I walked through my front door. The 2 movers stopped dead when they saw me. One of them was carrying my toolbox, the same red Craftsman box I'd owned for 25 years. The other had a box marked important documents that I'd never packed. Excuse me, I said calmly, who told you to take my tools? The older mover, a Hispanic man with calloused hands and worried eyes, looked confused. Sir, your son said you were moving to a care facility. We're just helping with the transition. He showed us the paperwork. Victor appeared from the kitchen, fast, moving like a man who'd been caught but wasn't ready to admit it. Behind him walked a woman with an official-looking folder and a nervous expression. Dad, you're supposed to be at the doctor's office until this afternoon. Plans changed. I looked at the woman with the folder, and you are Linda Davis, mobile notary. I'm here to witness some final document signings. Her voice had the practiced tone of someone who'd done this before, but her hands were shaking slightly. What documents? Victor stepped forward, trying to regain control of his performance. Dad, we talked about this. You're getting older, and managing this big house is becoming too much. The doctors think a supervised environment would be better for your health. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. He was actually going to try this with me standing right there in my own living room, surrounded by boxes of my belongings that he'd ordered strangers to pack. Show me the papers. Linda opened her folder with hands that trembled more with each passing second. Power of attorney forms with my forged signature, property transfer documents, a lease agreement for some assisted living facility called Sunset Manor that I'd never heard of. All professionally done, all completely fraudulent. When exactly did I sign these? I asked, my voice level. Victor's confidence started slipping like a car on ice. Last week, remember, when we had lunch at that place on Pacific Avenue? We haven't had lunch together in 2 months, son. That's when Howard Bennett walked through my front door, followed by Pete Martinez with a digital camera around his neck. The moving truck guys suddenly looked very interested in finding the nearest exit. Gentleman, Howard announced in his courtroom voice, I'm Mr. Thompson's attorney. I need to see proper identification and legal authorization for this move. Linda fumbled with her notary credentials. When Howard examined them under the kitchen light, his expression told the whole story before he said a word. These are fraudulent, Ms. Davis, you're impersonating a state-licensed notary public, and these signatures," he held up the power of attorney papers. "Mr. Thompson signed a revocable living trust 3 days ago that invalidates all of these documents, even if they were legitimate, which they clearly are not." Pete was taking photos of everything: the forged documents, the packed boxes, the moving truck license plate. The older mover set my toolbox down gently and stepped back. "Sir, we're just the moving company. Nobody told us there were any legal problems here." "No problems with you folks," I said. "Just put everything back where you found it." Victor's face had gone the color of concrete. The performance was over, and everyone in the room knew it. Linda grabbed her folder and headed for the door. "I need to check something with my office," she mumbled, but Pete was already blocking her path. "Actually, ma'am, I think you need to stick around for a few more questions. I'm a retired police officer, and what I've witnessed here today looks a lot like attempted fraud." The house went quiet except for the sound of the movers returning my tools to the workshop. Victor slumped into one of Margaret's kitchen chairs like someone had cut his puppet strings. "The people I owe money to don't negotiate payment plans, Dad. Then you should have come to me for help instead of trying to steal from me. Would you have given me $380,000? I thought about it honestly. I don't know, son. Maybe we could have found another way. Sold one of the restaurants, negotiated with the creditors, maybe even mortgaged the house legitimately. But now we'll never find out, will we?" Beverly arrived just as the police were taking Linda Davis away for questioning. The forged notary stamps were apparently part of a larger operation. Victor wasn't her first victim. She agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. Beverly stood in my kitchen, not looking at Victor. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "I've already talked to a divorce attorney. I'm taking the kids to my mother's place in Portland tonight." 3 weeks later, we all sat in Judge Patricia Harrison's courtroom downtown. The room smelled like old wood and floor wax, with high windows that let in shafts of afternoon sunlight. Victor had hired a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that his client was the one doing the abusing. The lawyer tried to argue that I was showing early signs of cognitive decline and hadn't fully understood what I was signing when I set up the trust. It was a desperate strategy, and Judge Harrison's expression made clear what she thought of it. "Your Honor," Howard said during his presentation, "Mr. Thompson is a retired master electrician who successfully completed his state recertification exam just 6 months ago. He installed a sophisticated security system in his own home and gathered evidence of this attempted fraud using skills acquired over 35 years in a technical profession. His cognitive function is demonstrably sound." Then came Beverly's testimony. The courtroom was dead silent as she played the recordings, Victor's voice planning the entire scheme, discussing my incompetence like it was already established fact, coordinating with the fake notary service. "Once I get the old man declared incompetent, the house gets liquidated. The bank gets their money, the casino gets theirs, and these private lenders back off. Everyone's happy, except maybe Dad, but he'll be in a nice facility where people can take care of him." When the recordings finished, Judge Harrison removed her glasses and stared at Victor for a long moment. "Mr. Thompson, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Victor stood slowly, looking older than his 38 years. "Your Honor, I was desperate. My family was in danger, but I never meant to hurt my father." "I'm sure you didn't," the judge replied. "Unfortunately, intent doesn't mitigate the fact that you attempted to defraud a family member through forged documents and false medical claims. All of Victor's forged paperwork was invalidated. His debts remained his problem alone. Within 2 months, his restaurant chain collapsed completely. The bank foreclosed on his house. He moved into a studio apartment near the port and took a job managing someone else's restaurant for $15 an hour. Beverly got full custody of the kids after the divorce. She brings them by every Sunday for dinner, and they still call me Grandpa Jerry. I still fix their bicycles in the workshop and help with their science projects. Last week, I taught Tommy how to wire a simple circuit with a battery and LED light, the same lesson I'd taught his father 25 years ago. Victor called me last month. "Dad, I know I screwed up, but you didn't have to destroy my entire life, son. I didn't destroy anything. I just protected what your mother and I built together. You destroyed your own life the minute you decided stealing from family was acceptable." He hung up without saying goodbye. These days, the house on Maple Street is quiet, but not empty. Pete and I play cards twice a week in the kitchen. Eddie from the hardware store stops by when he's got electrical questions. The Union Boys, my old crew from the electrical contractors, come around for barbecues where we solve the world's problems over beer and burgers. The security camera is still hidden in that junction box, just in case. Once you've been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, you learn to prepare for surprises. But I sleep fine at night, knowing I stood my ground when it mattered. Sometimes the best thing a father can do for his son is show him. There are consequences for crossing certain lines. Maybe Victor will figure that out someday. Maybe he won't. Either way, the house Margaret and I built together is still mine. And on quiet evenings when the workshop smells like sawdust and electrical tape, I can almost feel her approval. We protected what we built, and that's worth more than money. Sometimes the people who betray you teach you more about strength than the people who stay loyal. They force you to discover what you're truly made of when everything you trusted crumbles around you. Real family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when the chips are down, who chooses what's right over what's easy, and who helps you protect what matters most when your own flesh and blood won't.